Chapter 4 of Aesthetic as Science of Expression and General Linguistic. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lisa Reichert. Aesthetic as Science of Expression and General Linguistic by Benedetto Croce, translated by Douglas Ainsley, 1865 to 1948. Chapter 4 Historicism and Intellectualism in Aesthetic. These relations between intuitive or aesthetic knowledge and the other fundamental or derivative forms of knowledge having been definitely established, we are now in a position to reveal the errors of a series of theories which have been or are presented as theories of aesthetic. Critique of verisimilitude and of naturalism. From the confusion between the exigencies of art in general and the particular exigencies of history has arisen the theory, which has lost ground today but used to dominate in the past, of verisimilitude as the object of art. As is generally the case with erroneous propositions, the intention of those who employed and employ the concept of verisimilitude has no doubt often been much more reasonable than the definition given of the word. By verisimilitude used to be meant the artistic coherence of the representation, that is to say, its completeness and effectiveness. If verisimilar be translated by coherent, a most exact meaning will often be found in the discussions, examples, and judgments of the critics. An improbable personage, an improbable ending to a comedy, are really badly drawn personages, badly arranged endings, happenings without artistic motive. It has been said with reason that even fairies and sprites must have verisimilitude, that is to say, be really sprites and fairies, coherent artistic intuitions. Sometimes the word possible has been used instead of verisimilar. As we have already remarked in passing, this word possible is synonymous with that which is imaginable or may be known intuitively. Everything which is really, that is to say, coherently imagined is possible. But formerly, and especially by the theoreticians, by verisimilar was understood historical credibility, or that historical truth which is not demonstrable, but conjecturable, not true, but verisimilar. It has been sought to impose a like character upon art. Who does not recall the great part played in literary history by the criticism of the verisimilar? For example, the fault found with the Jerusalem Delivered, based upon the history of the Crusades, or of the Homeric poems, upon that of the verisimilitude of the costume of the emperors and kings. At other times has been imposed upon art the duty of the aesthetic reproduction of historical reality. This is another of the erroneous significations assumed by the theory concerning the imitation of nature. Verism and naturalism have since afforded the spectacle of a confusion of the aesthetic fact with the processes of the natural sciences, by aiming at some sort of experimental drama or romance. Critique of ideas in art, of theses in art, and of the typical. The confusions between the methods of art and those of the philosophical sciences have been far more frequent. Thus it has often been held to be within the competence of art to develop concepts, to unite the intelligible with the sensible, to represent ideas or universals, putting art in the place of science, that is, confusing the artistic function in general with the particular case in which it becomes aesthetico-logical. The theory of art as supporting theses can be reduced to the same error, as can be the theory of art considered as individual representation, exemplifying scientific laws. The example, in so far as it is an example, stands for the thing exemplified, and is thus an exposition of the universal, that is to say, a form of science, more or less popular or vulgarized. The same may be said of the aesthetic theory of the typical, when by type is understood, as it frequently is, just the abstraction or the concept, and it is affirmed that art should make the species shine in the individual. If by typical we here understood the individual, here too we have a merely verbal variation. To typify would signify, in this case to characterize, that is, to determine and to represent the individual. Don Quixote is a type, but of whom is he a type, if not of all Don Quixotes? A type, that is to say, of himself. Certainly he is not a type of abstract concepts, such as the loss of the sense of reality, or of the love of glory. An infinite number of personages can be thought of under these concepts, who are not Don Quixote. In other words, we find our own impressions fully determined and verified in the expression of a poet, for example, in a poetical personage. We call that expression typical, which we might call simply aesthetic. Poetical or artistic universals have been spoken of in like manner, in order to show that the artistic product is altogether spiritual and ideal in itself. Critique of the symbol and of the allegory. Continuing to correct these errors, or to make clear equivoques, we will note that the symbol has sometimes been given as essence of art. Now, if the symbol be given as inseparable from the artistic intuition, it is the synonym of the intuition itself, which always has an ideal character. There is no double bottom to art, but one only. In art all is symbolical, because all is ideal. But if the symbol be looked upon as separable, if on the one side can be expressed the symbol and on the other the thing symbolized, we fall back again into the intellectualist error. That pretended symbol is the exposition of an abstract concept, it is an allegory, it is science, or art that apes science. But we must be just toward the allegorical also. In some cases it is altogether harmless. Given the Jerusalem Liberata, the allegory was imagined afterwards. Given the Adonna of Marino, the poet of the Lascivious insinuated afterwards that it was written to show how immoderate indulgence ends in pain. Given a statue of a beautiful woman, the sculptor can write on a card that the statue represents clemency or goodness. This allegory, linked to a finished work post festum, does not change the work of art. What is it then? It is an expression externally added to another expression. A little page of prose is added to the Jerusalem, expressing another thought of the poet. A verse or a strophe is added to the Adonna, expressing what the poet would like to make a part of his public swallow, while to the statue nothing more than the single word is added, clemency or goodness. Critique of the theory of artistic and literary classes. But the greatest triumph of the intellectualist error lies in the theory of artistic and literary classes, which still has vogue in literary treatises, and disturbs the critics and the historians of art. Let us observe its genesis. The human mind can pass from the aesthetic to the logical, just because the former is a first step in respect to the latter. It can destroy the expressions, that is, the thought of the individual, with the thought of the universal. It can reduce expressive facts to logical relations. We have already shown that this operation in its turn becomes concrete in an expression, but this does not mean that the first expressions have not been destroyed. They have yielded their place to the new aesthetico-logical expressions. When we are on the second step, we have left the first. He who enters a picture gallery, or who reads a series of poems, may, after he has looked and read, go further. He may seek out the relations of the things there expressed. Thus those pictures and compositions, each of which is an individual inexpressible by logic, are resolved into universals and abstractions, such as costumes, landscapes, portraits, domestic life, battles, animals, flowers, fruit, seascapes, lakes, deserts, tragic, comic, piteous, cruel, lyrical, epic, dramatic, knightly, idyllic facts, and the like. They are often also resolved into merely quantitative categories, such as little picture, picture, statuette, group, madrigal, song, sonnet, garland of sonnets, poetry, poem, story, romance, and the like. When we think the concept domestic life, or knighthood, or idyll, or cruelty, or any other quantitative concept, the individual expressive fact from which we started is abandoned. From aesthetes that we were, we have been changed into logicians, from contemplators of expression into reasoners. Certainly, no objection can be made to such a process. In what other way could science be born, which, if aesthetic expression be assumed in it, yet has for function to go beyond them? The logical or scientific form, as such, excludes the aesthetic form. He who begins to think scientifically has already ceased to contemplate aesthetically, although his thought will assume of necessity, in its turn, an aesthetic form, as has already been said, and as it would be superfluous to repeat. The error begins when we try to deduce the expression from the concept, and to find in the thing substituting the laws of the thing substituted. When the difference between the second and the first step has not been observed, and when in consequence we declare that we are standing on the first step when we are really standing on the second. This error is known as the theory of artistic and literary classes. What is the aesthetic form of domestic life, of knighthood, of the idyll, of cruelty, and so forth? How should these contents be represented? Such is the absurd problem implied in the theory of artistic and literary classes. It is in this that consists all search after laws or rules of styles. Domestic life, knighthood, idyll, cruelty, and the like, are not impressions but concepts. They are not contents but logico-aesthetic forms. You cannot express the form, for it is already itself expression. And what are the words cruelty, idyll, knighthood, domestic life, and so on, but the expression of those concepts? Even the most refined of these distinctions, those that have the most philosophic appearance, do not resist criticism, as for instance, when works of art are divided into the subjective and the objective styles, into lyric and epic, into works of feeling and works of design. It is impossible to separate, in aesthetic analysis, the subjective from the objective side, the lyric from the epic, the image of feeling from that of things. Errors derived from this theory appearing in judgments on art. From the theory of the artistic and literary classes derive those erroneous modes of judgment and of criticism, thanks to which, instead of asking before a work of art if it be expressive, and what it expresses, whether it speak or stammer, or be silent altogether, it is asked if it be obedient to the laws of the epic poem, or to those of tragedy, to those of historical portraiture, or to those of landscape painting. Artists, however, while making a verbal pretence of agreeing, or yielding a feigned obedience to them, have really always disregarded these laws of styles. Every true work of art has violated some established class and upset the ideas of the critics, who have thus been obliged to enlarge the number of classes, until finally even this enlargement has proved too narrow, owing to the appearance of new works of art, which are naturally followed by new scandals, new upsettings, and new enlargements. From the same theory come the prejudices, owing to which at one time, and is it really past, People used to lament that Italy had no tragedy, until a poet arose who gave to Italy that wreath which was the only thing wanting to her glorious hair; nor France the epic poem, until the Henriade, which slaked the thirsty throats of the critics. Eulogies accorded to the inventors of new styles are connected with these prejudices, so much so, that in the 17th century the invention of the mock heroic poem seemed an important event, and the honour of it was disputed, as though it were the discovery of America. But the works adorned with this name, the Secchia Rapita and the Scherno delle Dee, were stillborn, because their authors, a slight drawback, had nothing new or original to say. Mediocrities racked their brains to invent, artificially, new styles. The piscatorial eclogue was added to the pastoral, and then finally the military eclogue. The Aminta was bathed and became the Alceo. Finally, there have been historians of art and literature so much fascinated with these ideas of classes, that they claimed to write the history, not of single and effective literary and artistic works, but of their classes, those empty phantoms. They have claimed to portray not the evolution of the artistic spirit, but the evolution of classes. The philosophical condemnation of artistic and literary classes is found in the formulation and demonstration of what artistic activity has ever sought, and good taste ever recognized. What is to be done if good taste and the real fact, put into formulas, sometimes assume the air of paradoxes? Empirical sense of the divisions of classes. Now, if we talk of tragedies, comedies, dramas, romances, pictures of everyday life, battle pieces, landscapes, seascapes, poems, versicles, lyrics, and the like, if it be only with a view to be understood, and to draw attention in general and approximatively to certain groups of works, to which, for one reason or another, it is desired to draw attention, in that case no scientific error has been committed. We employ vocables and phrases, we do not establish laws and definitions. The mistake arises when the weight of a scientific definition is given to a word, when we ingenuously let ourselves be caught in the meshes of that phraseology. Pray permit me a comparison. It is necessary to arrange the books in a library in one way or another. This used generally to be done by means of a rough classification by subjects, among which the categories of miscellaneous and eccentric were not wanting. They are now generally arranged by sizes or by publishers. Who can deny the necessity and the utility of these groupings? But what should we say if some one began seriously to seek out the literary laws of miscellanies and of eccentricities from the Aldine or Bodonian collection, from size A or size B, that is to say, from these altogether arbitrary groupings whose sole object has been their practical use? Well, whoever should undertake an enterprise such as this would be doing neither more nor less than those who seek out the aesthetic laws of literary and artistic classes. End of chapter 4. Recording by Lisa Reichert.